Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Wow. Okay. Wednesday, compressed day, but a quick reminder. Coffee and Coaches Conference call tomorrow, 6 a.m. Thursday. Join us. Casual conversation, technical conversation. We cover a full spectrum of topics every time we have a call. We usually have a great group, so please join us for that. I got a couple questions that came through Q&A that are very, very similar on some level. And it's regarding impingements. And so John had a shoulder impingement and Max had a hip impingement. And they were both looking for some advice. And so I just thought that this is actually a really interesting topic. If we can model this a little bit differently than what may have been represented in the past, it might give us a couple of clues as to how we want to address these things, because there are similarities regardless of where you have a perception of impingement. The rules are kind of the same. And so we want to go back and we want to think about what strategies we have available. So we only have two strategies and one plane. So remember that. Two strategies: compression, expansion, one plane, transverse. It's the only ones we got. Let's leave the other stuff out of it. It's just confusing at this point. And so as we move through our space on Earth here, and we're dealing with the load of gravity, there are forces that we have to apply upward against gravity to hold our positions, to move heavy things and such. And so under those circumstances, what we have to do is we have to capture the propulsive strategy. And at some point in time, the forces ramp up. So we would call that max propulsion under certain circumstances. And the forces are variable depending on what we're doing. If we're just walking, there's the max propulsion is going to be a certain level of force. If we're running, it's a little bit different. If we're lifting heavy things, it's going to be a little bit different. But the point being is that we have to be able to capture a position that allows us to apply this upward force. That's going to be done with sufficient relative internal rotation, an exhalation strategy, and compression. And so that always goes along with that upward force. So when we're dealing with impingement issues, what we have done is we've created a resultant that does not allow us to distribute this force sufficiently throughout our entire system. And so now we're going to use a focal strategy, a focal compressive strategy, to apply this maximum propulsion depending on what activity that we're going to do. And so it's a quest, if you will, to sort of acquire sufficient internal rotation and compression to help maintain our position or do whatever activity that we're doing. So let me give you a couple of examples as to what I'm talking about. So let's just say that you're my narrow ISA archetype. And so you're going to be biased towards this early propulsive foot. Let me turn around this way so we can go this way. So we got this early propulsive foot, which is biased towards external rotation. But for me to walk normally, I have to acquire an internal rotation as I move through this propulsive excursion of the foot. But what if I'm biased towards ER? Then I don't have this IR available to me. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to acquire it somewhere else. So now what I may end up doing is I may have to anteriorly orient my pelvis over the femur to acquire a representation of this max propulsion. So this is how I'm going to try to acquire the so-called internal rotation, but it's not really internal rotation. It's just this anterior orientation and compressive strategy. So now I have pain that might arise in the front of my hip. I might use my knee as the substitution and magnify the amount of internal rotation at the knee joint, and therefore I get medial knee pain. I might be orienting my pelvis to such a degree that now I get focal load in the facet joints of the lumbar spine. So once again, all we're trying to do is acquire a position that allows us to apply sufficient force to hold and hold our positions and allow us to move through space. So if we understand that this is the issue, then what is the solution? So this is why we talk about the importance of normalizing breathing, because what normalizing breathing represents is our ability to move through full excursions of internal and external rotation, which is representative of the relative motions of every segment of our body. And if we have that relative motion available to us, or we have sufficient adaptability available to us, then we distribute the forces rather than creating these focal loads of impingement. So it'd be really nice if we had like this hip impingement cookbook, or we had a low back impingement cookbook, or we had a suboccipital impingement cookbook, but really it just goes back to understanding what these representations are. So this is why we're looking to measure internal and external rotations. This is why we're looking to identify where the compressive strategies are. They're always exhalation strategies. We identify where these compression strategies are that are limiting our ability to recapture the relative motion. So the solution at the bottom line is we have to normalize breathing to whatever degree that we need to acquire sufficient adaptability in the system to distribute forces rather than creating these focal loads. So once again, this is going to be an n=1 situation, and in many cases there are similarities certainly between my wide and my narrow archetypes. But in general, the rules are the same. We're trying to acquire a substitution for the lack of relative motion, typically trying to utilize an internal rotation strategy, exhalation-based strategy, and compressive-based strategy that is creating the focal load. So I hope that's a little bit helpful from a perspective standpoint. We can talk about some specifics at some point down the line, I would imagine, but there's a lot of stuff that's already up on YouTube and on Instagram that we've covered about reacquiring internal rotations of the shoulder, internal rotation of the hip specifically. We're looking at knee issues. So I had a whole sequence of videos on the different variations of knee pain. So take a look at those if you need some strategy. And then if you have any specific questions, send them to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com. Have a terrific Wednesday. I'll see you guys on the Coffee and Coaches call in the morning. Have a great day.